What a fitting song for the series that we're going through on the names of God. Last week, or the last time that we met, we looked at Elohim, one of the names of God. In the beginning, God, in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. We looked at Elohim means the strong one, the strong creator God. But before we go into this week's name, I want us to take a step back and kind of do a short little Bible study. The Old Testament, it was written in Hebrew. So if you ever hear us talking about the original language, that would be Hebrew. The New Testament was written in Greek. There's a little bit of Aramaic spread throughout it. But when we talk about the names of God, what we're looking at is the Hebrew names of God. So on the screen, I've got, if we look at Elohim in our English translation, when you read through it, it will say God. So when you come across God in your English Bible, that is Elohim. When you come across Lord in all capital letters, that is God's name, Yahweh. It's the name we'll look at today. When you come across Lord with a capital L and a lowercase Lord, that is Adonai in the Hebrew language. That's the name that we will look at next week. And that will help as you start to read through the Old Testament to begin to see these different names of God and begin to appreciate their meaning and the significance behind it. I also want to state, when it comes to the name Yahweh, to be honest, we don't know how it's pronounced. The Jews, they held God's name in such high esteem that even to pronounce God's name could be blasphemy. So what they did is they took out the vowels. The only thing that we have when it comes to Yahweh is the consonants. We don't have the vowels. So we're not exactly for sure how it's pronounced. Most scholars believe it's Yahweh. Some pronounce it as Jehovah. But for our sake, throughout this series, we're going to call him Yahweh. But to better understand the meaning of the name Yahweh, we need to take a closer look at the life of Moses. Moses had grown up as a man with great potential. He grew up in the household of Pharaoh. He got the best education. He had a very bright future ahead of him. But he kind of stepped in a little bit too quickly and tried to take his destiny into his own hands. And we know the story. He had to run away from Egypt after killing one of the guards, and he spent 40 years penning sheep. I don't know about you, but maybe you have felt that way before. A time in your life that you felt like you had great potential, but maybe a choice that you had made or something in your life had happened, and that potential that you once thought you had was lost. You thought it was over. You thought you missed your chance. You had potential at one point, but now that potential is gone. If you feel that way, be patient. It took 40 years before God showed up to Moses in the burning bush. Now, I don't believe that God was not with Moses throughout those 40 years. I think he was with him throughout his entire life. But maybe Moses didn't know that, or maybe Moses didn't feel that. It wasn't until he showed up in the burning bush did God feel, or did Moses feel his calling once again. Be patient. Don't know when God's going to show up, but take advantage of this time. Because how do you not know that this time God is molding you? He's developing you. He's strengthening you for the mission that he has for you. And who knows, maybe you will be in your 80s, like Moses, when God reveals his mission. For Moses, everything changed at the burning bush. God was about to confront Moses with a challenge of a lifetime while also revealing a little bit more about who he is. It was a challenge to go back to Pharaoh and say, release my people. Take them out of slavery. Let them go back and be able to worship their God. It was a mission that to him was
was impossible. No doubt Moses at this point in his life, he had become accustomed to the same old landscape, the same old sheep, the same old routine, until in Exodus 3, starting with verse 1, we read this. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mount of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses says, I will turn aside and to see this great sight, why this bush is not burning up. This is when Moses receives that mission to go back, the mission that is impossible, and he realizes that this mission is too great for him. And in verse 11, we read, But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And God assures Moses. He assures him, he says he will give him a sign, and it says, and he said, But I will be with you. And this shall be a sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve the God on this mountain. Now when Moses had heard everything that God had said, everything that he has commanded him to do, all the promises that he has made, Moses becomes fearful. There's no doubt we would become fearful if we was put in that same position as well. And then it says, And then Moses said to God, If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? God says to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Say this to the people of Israel, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. Thus I am to be remembered throughout all of the generations. When Moses asked, What is your name? What am I to tell them if they ask me, What is your name? And he says, I am who I am. He says, I am Yahweh. I am the Lord. I am the God, the strong one of Abraham. The God of Isaac, the strong one of Jacob. Say to them, I am. Say to them, Yahweh has sent me to you. This is the most commonly used name of God. It's used about 6,000 times in the Old Testament. And this name, Yahweh, is very important. It's very significant that we begin to understand what Yahweh means and who Yahweh is. You see, because Yahweh is self-sufficient. Yahweh doesn't need anyone. It's often been debated, why did God create? Why did God create man? Did he create us because he was lonely? Did he create us because he needed us? No. God is self-sufficient. Yahweh doesn't need anyone apart from himself. And Yahweh is self-generating and self-existing. You know, as human beings, we had a time in which we were not. We had a beginning. We were born. Each and every one of us can say, I am. But only God can say, I am who I am. Only God is self-existing. Only God is eternal. He had no beginning and he will have no end. We had a beginning. Although we may live forever, we had a beginning. Yahweh isn't dependent on anyone or anything for his existence. And Yahweh is also unchangeable. God does not change. The Hebrew writer says this about Jesus. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. God is always the same. Some have looked at the Old Testament and they have tried to debate, saying, oh, well, maybe the God of the Old Testament is different than the God of the New Testament. No, God is the same. His love is the same. His purpose is the same. He is eternal. He's always in the present tense, which on a practical level means that God can never become irrelevant. He's always relevant. He always matters. Some have tried to say that God has become irrelevant, or maybe the church has become irrelevant, but never change. He's always present, always loving, but He will also always be the Lord. And Yahweh is self-defined. He is who He is. He says, I am who I am, which means He may not always be what you want Him to be. He is who He is. He's a self-existing one. We sometimes try to put Him in a box. We try to define Him. Even a sermon series on the names of God to look at the different characteristics of God will not do Him justice. We can't completely define Him. We can't put Him in a box. He is who He is. He may not be who you want Him to be. He will always be who you need Him to be. He's self-defined. And when we approach God on the basis of who He says He is, then we're ready to see Him as I am who I am. We're ready to see Him as Yahweh, the self-existing one, and we don't want to miss Yahweh. You see, because Yahweh is also relational. So far, we've looked at two crucial names of God in the Old Testament, Elohim and Yahweh. Elohim is God's creative and powerful name, and Yahweh is God's personal name, His self-revealing name. And essentially, when we talk about Elohim, we're talking and studying about God as the Creator. We're looking at His power and His presence. But when we talk about Yahweh, we're talking about God's more personal side. His personal character. Elohim is connected with Him creating the heavens and the earth. And Yahweh is connected with His character that is involved in His creation. He cares about His creation. He is connected with His creation. He's personally involved. We see that in Genesis. You see, in Genesis chapter 2, there's a transition. From Genesis 1 until Genesis 2:3, the only name that we have for God is Elohim. But when we get in Genesis 2:4, a name transition takes place. And we're introduced to Yahweh. And Genesis chapter 2 is really a fuller account of God's creation of man. A more in-depth look at His creation. And it's at this point that we see Yahweh, we see Elohim interacting with His creation in a new way. Because the Lord, because Yahweh, He has formed man. It says He has planted a garden. He has caused it to grow. He has took the man and put him into the garden. He has commanded the man. He has formed every beast and brought him before the man. He has caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man. He took one of his ribs and closed up his flesh. He fashioned into a woman the rib that He had taken. You see, we see more of the personal side of God, of forming man from the dust of the ground and breathing in His own breath to make him a living soul. We go from Elohim, the strong creator, to Yahweh, the strong creator that is involved, that loves His creation. And it's important that we know both sides of God. Because it's entirely possible for people to believe in God as Elohim To believe in God as the Creator, but not to know Yahweh. There's many people who believe in an intelligent designer. A God who created the heavens and the earth and then did just step back and allow creation to go on just however it needs to go. But that's not who our God is. Our God is a personal God. Our God, Yahweh, even became flesh. He dwelt among us. To have a relationship with us, to be that high priest that can sympathize with our weakness, that has in every way been tempted yet without sin, and ultimately went to the cross as a perfect sacrifice. To rebuild that relationship. You see, because Jesus himself even referred to himself as Yahweh, the I am. In John chapter 8, Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." You see, the Jews knew what he meant by that. In the Greek, it's ego eimi. I am. John knew what he was doing when he wrote all the I am statements of Jesus. I am the good shepherd. I am the door. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection. And the Jews knew that too. Jesus saying, I am, was Jesus saying, I am Yahweh. I am God. Because very next in verse 56 of John 8, it says, so they picked up stones to throw at him. They wanted to kill him. Because they knew the claims that he was making. So to understand God as Yahweh is to understand that he is unchangeable. That he is self-sufficient Lord over the universe, but he wants an intimate relationship with each and every one of us. Which brings us to that question, how do we know God is Yahweh? How do we know him? In Exodus 33, we're given a vivid picture of the incredible relationship that God enjoyed, or that Moses enjoyed with God. In verse 7, it says, now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside of the camp, far off from the camp, and he called it the tent of meetings. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent and meet, which was outside of the camp. Now, verse 9. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of the cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. And when all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would rise up and worship, each at his tent door. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks with his friend. It's an incredible passage. Other than Adam and Eve, very few other people in the Old Testament had such a close and intimate relationship with God as Moses did. But how did this relationship come about? We don't know all of the details, but I think we get a hint later on in verse 18, where it says, Moses said, please show me your glory. You see, one of the reasons why Moses had such a close relationship with God is because he asked for it. Plain and simple. And the reason that he asked for this close relationship with God is he truly desired to have a close relationship with God. He wanted that. He made that his priority. We see examples of that all throughout Scriptures. When the little children wanted to meet Jesus and their parents asked to see him. When Mary wanted to know Jesus more deeply, she forgot everything and just sat at his feet. You know, sometimes we make things a little too complicated. But we don't have to here. If we want to know God more, all we have to do is seek him with all of our heart. And he tells us that himself. In Jeremiah 29:13, he says, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. So how do we know God is Yahweh? We ask for it. And we always ask for more. Moses said, show me your glory. Moses had been talking with God face to face as with a friend. But you know, he didn't stop there. Moses could have been satisfied with the burning bush. Moses could have been satisfied with the plagues on Egypt. Moses could have been satisfied with the parting of the Red Sea and the destruction of Pharaoh's army. He could have been satisfied with talking to God face to face as with a friend. But he wasn't. He wanted more. And it's not because he was just discontent. He wanted more because he loved God that much that he kept asking for more. And you know what? God granted that request. In verse 19, Exodus 33, we read, and he said, I will make all of my goodness pass before you, and proclaim before you the name of the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. But he said, you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live. Moses could have been satisfied, but he wasn't, because he wanted more. You know why so many Christians do not experience God on a deeper level? It's because we're too busy. We are too distracted to ask for more. Or we're just satisfied with the burning bush. We're satisfied with an introduction of God's power and nothing more. Just a teaspoon of God. Not enough to change me. Not enough to make a difference, but at least enough to give me comfort. It's what many of us stop at. And as we've seen, God, Yahweh is relational. He wants an intimate relationship with us, and He will come as close as possible if we will just ask. Moses made the effort, and he took the time to be in the presence of Yahweh. And he said, I want more. I want more. Are we satisfied with just a teaspoon of God? Just a little amount of Him. For fire insurance, maybe. Or do we truly want more? Do we truly want a relationship with Him? A relationship that will change who we are? When we come into His presence, the Almighty God that's the Lord of the universe, but also wants to have a relationship with you. We ask for